Welcome, 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 and happy Juneteenth. I am Viv with Art with Viv if we haven't met, and today I'm doing this beautiful little girl in a celebration of freedom for Juneteenth. Now, if you're not familiar with Juneteenth was when the slaves in Texas in 1865 were finally informed that they were free. So in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was enacted, and almost all of the slaves were free except for the ones in the most western part of Texas. They had no idea for almost 2.5 years later when finally soldiers came and told them that they were free as well. So it is a really happy celebration of the freedom of all Americans. That is when every American finally became free, and our July the 4th notion of freedom for everyone, equality, was finally beginning to get on the right track for all Americans. So that's why I decided to paint this gorgeous little girl. Now, this is not going to be a tutorial in my Sweet Art Squad. It's a bit complicated for that. I'm not sure if anyone is interested in a tutorial of this little girl, because it is so involved and complicated. This is my longest video yet. I will try to walk you through some of the things that I do, but it's not going to be a normal tutorial. It's not going to be a step-by-step tutorial. It's just simply too long and too involved. I had to cut it down to 40 minutes, and even that's a little bit long, but the actual painting took me several hours to do. Now, I first drew out my little girl, put a flag behind her, and then all of the areas that I wanted to remain white, of course, I covered with masking fluid. Then I wet her face with clean water, and I took some pale golden brown. Actually, I think that was a little bit of Naples with a little bit of burnt sienna mixed together to get that really pale golden color for the highlights of her skin. Then I went into my burnt sienna. I added a little bit of blue and a little bit of purple for the shadows. And that is how I have mixed the colors. Now I'm working wet and wet here, and I'm trying to work fast. And what I'm doing is I'm mapping out the basic shadows of her face and the highlights. I'm leaving the highlights, of course, that really pale golden yellow. And then I'm darkening up where her shadows are across her face, where the darker areas are across her face. Don't be afraid to paint flesh tones. They're really not hard to mix, and you mix the same exact colors for a white skin tone as you would do a brown or a really dark brown skin tone. It's the same colors, you just adjust the ratio of the colors. For example, if you wanted to do a white skin tone, you would have more pinks and yellows to make more of a peach. If you want, of course, a darker skin tone, you can add in some of the browns, but if you don't have like the convenience earth tones, you can mix up pink, yellow, and blue, and you just add a little bit more blue than you would if you were mixing up a Caucasian skin tone. Skin is really all the same mixture. It just depends on how much of each color you put in, whether you will get a pale skin tone or a dark skin tone. That's all there is to it. And since watercolor is so translucent, it makes for wonderful skin tones because our skin is translucent. A lot of, you can see the color of your veins through pale skin. Even if you have brown skin, if it is a pale brown, or you can see through it. It's not opaque. It is translucent to the tissues and the veins underneath. Then I'm doing her hair, and the way that I did her hair is I just mixed an indigo blue with a burnt umber until I got sort of a blackish color. I'm doing the first layer in a really watery mix so that it's gray. That's going to be the highlights. And then where I want those shadows, I'm just dropping in more of the color that I mixed. Again, that is just a little bit of indigo and a little bit of burnt umber. I'm also taking a little bit of purple mixed with a little bit of burnt umber, and I'm starting to do her darker shadows under her chin and where the darkest parts of her face are. And I am just sort of blocking those in, mapping those out, and then I'm just going to take a little bit of clean water and sort of soften up the edges. I don't want those really hard edges, so I'm just taking clean water and putting them, just brushing it down the side of that color and blending it out a little bit. And then I'm just going to continue to build up the shadows on her face, and I'm using different color mixtures. Mostly for the really dark areas, I'm using a little bit of burnt sienna mixed with a Windsor purple. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the colors. This isn't going to be in my Sweet Art Squad. If you want to give it a go ahead on your own. But I usually put every Monday morning or every Monday video in my Sweet Art Squad, but this is going to be one that I think is just a little bit long, and I don't know, I think it's a lot. It's a lot to do because there are so many little details. Now I've put those dark shadows in over her eyes, and now the sun is shining right sort of on top of her forehead. She has a really nice cinnamony glow on the top of her forehead from that sunlight hitting it. So I'm taking more of a cinnamony brown color and putting that into those areas where the sunlight is really setting it aglow. Her skin is really pretty. She has really pretty skin. My painting did not do her justice, but I did my best, and I think it came out okay in the end, so that's all I'm worried about. Now I am painting in her eyeballs. Her eyes are almost closed, so you can just see a little sliver of her eyeballs. Also, the white of her eye is not white because it's in shadow, so it will be painted gray later. I'm getting in those nostrils, and I'm using the same color that I used for her hair to put in her nostrils. Some of that paint went into my eyeball and I didn't want it, so I just lifted it up a little bit. But Juneteenth is really, I think, a really good celebration of freedom for all Americans. It's not just a black holiday. If you love freedom and you really believe in independence and what our Constitution says, then you believe in Juneteenth too. Juneteenth is a time to celebrate. And if I'm going to be honest, I like as many holidays as I can get. Now I've gotten a really dark color here for her eyebrows, her eyes, and her eyelashes, and I mixed that. That's actually also the purple with the burnt umber. I made it really dark so that it looks almost black, and I'm just blending that out with a wet brush. Those shadows around her eyelid, on her cheeks, I'm just blending it out. Now this is highly sped up. This took me quite a few hours to complete, and I'm trying to show you in less than an hour. And so it's a little rushed. That's why another reason I'm not going to put this in my Sweet Art Squad. It is too rushed. I have another one that I will probably put in there. But if you are a member of the Sweet Art Squad, you will know that I said you will get from 2 to 4 videos a month. I've been very diligent about giving you 4 a month. This will be the first time that you will only get 3 this month. So I am keeping up my end of the bargain and then some. It's just this one is a little bit much. And for me to do this one, I would have to do a full-blown tutorial for this to make sense, and to go step by step where I feel like you could catch on. Where simpler ones, I know you can catch on just by watching. I don't have to go as fast with the speed of it. So that is my reasoning for not putting this one in the Sweet Art Squad. Now I have put more shadows around that eye. I am also darkening up the whites of her eyes. Again, they are not pure white because they are under the shadow of her eyelid and those lashes. So her eyelids, I did a really pale blue gray. I mean, not her eyelids. Sorry, her eyeballs, the actual whites of her eyes, I did in a pale bluish gray because again, they are in shadow. They are not pure white. And I'm just trying to add in the shadows around her mouth and nose. I want her mouth to look like she's blowing, sort of pursed, but in a nice, relaxed way. I'm getting those shadows around her nose so that makes her nose have a better shape. It's starting to look like a nose and not just a little potato on the end of her face. And I am making her lips are darker than her facial skin. So I've gone back to that darker sort of purpley brown, and I've also added a little bit of rose in there, because like right on the tips of her lips she has this beautiful blush color, this natural sort of pink color. So I put that in there right on, like right where her lips meet. That's where that beautiful color comes in, so I put that in there. Also just adding shadows, and that's basically what I'm doing to build her face, or to get her face rendered correctly, is I'm just layering shadows, layering these colors in different amounts. Like some are darker, some are lighter, some are more watery, some are less watery, and just really trying to build up the features of her face by layering these colors. And I'm just right now just trying to get that action going around her face. I want her lips to look like they're pursed. It's a little bit hard for me. I'm not a portraiture person. I don't really like to paint humans, but my heart just said that I needed to paint this little girl, and so I have. And I'm pretty pleased with how she came out. I think she's cute. So although I don't consider myself a portrait artist, I am pretty pleased with the outcome. Really, if you can paint a dog, you can paint a person, you can paint anything. And I think for me it comes down to what I want to paint. And I really don't usually enjoy painting humans, but I really enjoyed this one. She came out really, really nice. I love the way the whole painting came out, and I can't wait for you to see the end. Now I'm just letting some things dry. I'm getting some things mixed here. And I've decided that I need to scrape out a few highlights. I got too much color in some of the areas, so I'm just taking a little scrubber brush and going along the bridge of her nose and lifting up some of that color. She has a nice bright highlight underneath her eye, just lifting that up, and right on the top of her eyelid. So I'm just taking a really tiny bristle brush, and I am just lifting some of that color up so that she'll have better highlights, blending in where that sun is just hitting straight on her little forehead, just blending that out so it looks more realistic and looks more natural. And I am just going to work on her lips and around her mouth with some more shadows. I'm going to let you watch for a second, and I will return shortly. Now I decided she looked a little bit pale, so I added another layer of some rich browns in the shadow areas of her face, and really putting in a little bit more detail around her eyes and around her eyelids. And I think she's starting to look a little more convincing that she is indeed a female and indeed a human. So I think that's coming out pretty well. And I'm just really working on lots of details, and the main focus is trying to get those shadows correct, because it's the light and shadow that gives you the form in your painting. So you try to get your highlights correct, you try to get your shadows correct. You want them the right shape, you want them in the right spot, you want them the right degree of darkness or lightness, and that is really all there is to it, is getting those elements into place. Basically, that's basically what you're doing when you're trying to render a shape. So I'm going a little bit darker. I'm still not satisfied with all of her shadows. She's still looking a little bit like she's all of a mid-tone. She has a few highlights, but I'm just coming back in with some more really dark colors, getting in that little ear of hers. We're going to start working on her arms and her hands, and again I'm using a deep purpley brown for the shadows on her arms and the darker shadows on her face. Now the hands are pretty tricky. Hands are always tricky. So I'm trying to get in the shadows and the shapes, make sure I get her fingernails there. The lightest part of her fingers are her fingernails. And also trying to pay attention to the bone structure in the back of her hand, how her bones come from her knuckles down to her wrist. And I'm just adding a little hint of shadow there. Also where her fingers are bent and her knuckles are protruding, I'm leaving that a little bit lighter. Her other fingers are clasped over. She's holding that little dandelion. And like so many of us, I'm sure, did as children, she's blowing on it and making a wish. And I think freedom and equality is the best wish anybody could ever have come true. So I was trying to do a little symbolism. I'm not really good with that, but this is what I came up with. This is what I felt in my head and heart that would portray what I had in mind for Juneteenth. So sometimes if you need to turn your paper, turn it so that you can paint better. I want to get some of her hair in here. She has 2 little braids that go across the top part of her hair, and it's up in a nice little bun, but she does have 2 braids at the top, and then the rest of it's just sort of pulled back into that bun all together with the braids. So I'm just giving an indication of those. You see I'm leaving some of that first initial wash shining through for my highlights, and I'm going with a darker. Now this is a brownish black. Her hair is not black. From the reference photo I used, her hair has a lot of reddish brown in it. So I went with a brownish black instead of just like a blue black. So I tried to match the color of her natural hair as closely as possible. And I'm just giving it some texture, making sure that I'm letting it look like it's being lifted up by the way that I put my paint strokes toward that bun. Gives it a little bit of sense of movement, and I'm also letting that lighter layer shine through in some spots to give it some highlights and give it some definition and texture. She is a cute little thing, and I just want her to be perfect in my eyes. I don't care about y'all's eyes. I'm just worried about my eyes, and I just want her to look really cute. So that's my thing, and I want her to look realistic. I don't want her to be so cute that you're like, oh, she's a made-up girl. She's not even real. I want her to look realistic. And I want her hair to be as convincing as possible without doing every little hair or every little mark on her braid. That'd be too much work for me, and I'm not that ambitious. So in her little bun, it's just like a little bun, and I'm just adding the texture and some darker shadows, letting some of that mid-tone shine through. And I'll probably take some white and do a few little highlights from where the sun is just glistening off. Now that her hands are dry, I'm working on those fingernails. I'm putting a little pink into the brown for her fingernails. I'm trying to keep them light because on almost every human, your fingernails are lighter than the rest of the skin on your hands. And usually the tips under the nails are pink if you are a healthy person. Now, if you got some iron deficiencies or some deficiencies going on, you might not be as pink on your fingertips, but my little lady here is healthy, so she has a little pink in there. Now I am just darkening up some of those shadows of the braids and some of those little wisps of hair that she has pulled up into her bun, darkening underneath the bun where the shadow is, and leaving that lighter top part of her bun light. So of course, because the sun's going to hit that, because it's up high, and underneath the bun it's going to be dark because the sun's not hitting it there. Now I'm just taking a nice beautiful blue, painting in the background of the backdrop of her flag. And this is, where the stars are. So I'm just doing this straight onto dry paper. And I am painting, getting that first layer in. And then I'm going to go to a darker blue and add some shadows while this blue is still wet. But I first wanted to fill in all of the little areas. Now I'm putting in some really darker blue where the shadows would be. The flag is blowing, it's rippling, so it has some shadows going across it. And on top of that, she is casting a little bit of a shadow by standing near the flag. Now I've just lifted up just a little bit of that, pigment in the highlight areas so that it'll look like there's some movement there, and that it's kind of rolling and rippling. Even though it's just a painting, we want to give it some movements, and you do that through light, shadow, and the way that you paint your lines, the directional lines that you paint. So now I've got a nice red. I went ahead, I don't know if you can see, but I marked like red, white, where the stripes were red, which stripes were white, so that I wouldn't get mixed up. And I'm just going to erase those as I go, the little letters that I have in each little section. I'm going to erase my R there. And I've just got a nice bright red, clean red. and I'm doing the first initial layer of that red, and then I'm going to come while it's still wet and add some deeper red, like some alizarin crimson that has a little bit more blue in it, a little purplier, and that'll be my shadow color. And then I'm going to lift some of that pigment, some of that red pigment up in the lighter areas so that it'll have a little bit more of a contrast between the shadows and the highlights. So that's what we're doing there. Right now I'm just adding a little bit more of that deeper red to the shadow areas. And I'm doing that wet on wet, and I'm just letting it do its thing. Just letting it go. Now I'm going to continue, since I have my red paint mixed and out on my palette. We're just going to do all the red stripes first, and I'm going to let you watch. It's the same technique that I did with that very first stripe, and I will return shortly. Now we're going to let those red stripes dry before I put the white stripes on. And I'm going to paint her shirt. Now in the reference photo, her shirt is pink and blue and white, and it's sort of color blocked, but I didn't want to have that much fussiness against all of those stripes. It would just be too much visually. So I decided to, instead of follow the reference, I just decided to make her shirt sort of a pale blue, sort of repeat the pattern, the color from the corner of the flag, and bring that same blue down into a shirt, only a really watery mixture. And where there are shadows, I'm just coming back in while it's still wet and dropping in a concentrated amount of pigment. That just means it has less water and more paint. So where I want the shadows, I'm just adding more paint, less water, and I'm doing that while it's wet so that it'll be nice and soft. There's no hard edges. I want everything to just blend through. I don't want her shirt to be too detailed. I don't really want to draw attention to her shirt. I want all the attention to be on her highly detailed face. So everything else sort of takes the back seat to her face. Her face is the star of the show, and it is the focal point of this composition. So I'm just doing her clothes really loosely, wet on wet, and I'm not getting too fussy about it, but you can still tell it's her shirt. You can see where her sleeves are, you can see where her collar is, where her little ruffles on the ends of her sleeve are. It all still works because our brains are amazing and our brains make it work. If you give the suggestion to your brain, like I've said, it will run with it. So that's all we're doing here. I've also added a little bit of the brown tones from her skin into that blue, and that's just to sort of unify the painting, just bringing some of that color from her skin down into that blue. And that's all I did there. That's why I did that. I just wanted to sort of unify it and repeat her color into her clothes. Her little bow in her hair, I'm going with a really, really, really watery blue. It's the same blue that's on the flag and on her shirt. It's just lots of water is added to it. And I'm leaving a lot of white, a lot of exposed paper, just so that it sort of separates itself from the background. Now, the white stripes, I do not want them to be pure white because she has that dandelion, and I want that dandelion to be the whitest part of the paper along with the seeds that she blew. So I've mixed up a really watery blue-gray, and that is what I'm painting the white stripes with. Again, I do not want them to be pure white because I want that dandelion to be the whitest part on there. I want it to your attention to be brought to it. So therefore I am painting the white stripes actually gray, but it looks fine. It's not really reading as gray, partially because you know in your mind that it is red, white, and blue, that those stripes are actually white. So your brain is telling you, even though I've painted them gray, that they are definitely white. Again, the brain is so amazing. And while it's wet, I'm taking a little bit more of that grayish blue mixture and tapping it into where the shadows are, how the flag is rippling. So it's the same technique that we did with the red stripes. We're painting in a light wash of gray and then coming back in and adding more gray paint where we want our shadows. And I'm going to let you watch because it's an easy technique and we've already done it. And I will return shortly. So now I'm just adding some details to her hair. I've got a little white wash. I'm doing a few highlights on the top of her bun and the very tip top of her hair where the sunlight's hitting. I did a little darker lines in the center of her bow, and now I'm taking the white gouache and where she has some little highlights on her skin, I am just doing really pale white gouache on those highlights, and I've mixed it with just, you can barely tell, but I've mixed it with just the tiniest bit of brown. I just want to get those soft highlights in there, and I'm using gouache to do it instead of scraping up the paper more. I scraped it a little bit in the beginning, but I don't want to continue to scrape it. It will overwork the paper and it'll look not good. And I'm trying to pay attention to her little ear and get all of those little details in there. Darkening up some shadows. Also darkening up a shadow around on the background around her face. On that white stripe there, I'm just adding a little bit more color there. That will help her face stand out from the background a little bit more as well. Adding some more shadows to her hands and to that little bow on the back of her bun. And I'm still seeing some areas where I need to add a little bit of darker shadow to the white stripes. Now I've let it dry completely, and through the magic of video, we didn't wait. And now I'm just taking my rubber cement pickup and I'm rubbing off all of the masking fluid where we wanted to save the whites. So I've got a little green. I'm going to do the stem for the dandelion and the little center part with a little bit of yellow and green. And then I'm just going to do some lines radiating out from it, so you know that you can tell that it is a flower, a dandelion. And her bracelet, I'm going ahead and just add a little color, making sure I leave some highlights so that you can tell these are little round beads on her bracelet. Just trying to get the details done now. And I am also going to add a little darker brown to the center part, some of those seeds. And that'll just help define those little seeds so that you can see them, those little fuzzy wuzzies. Just add a little shadow down the side of the stem. And now I'm going to take a darker color so that you can see the sort of the stem of the seed. The little thing that holds, I call it the little fuzzy umbrella up. And it gives them a little bit more definition. So I'm just going to go through and do that. Work on this stem a little bit. I want it to have a darker side and a lighter side. Get in some definition, and I'm just using sort of a yellowish brown for the for those little seeds. And now I'm just going to take some white gouache, and I am going to fluff this up a little bit. Just tapping some of that white gouache onto the painting, and that makes it a little bigger and sort of bring out some of those fuzzies. You know, the masking fluid makes those lines look a little thick, so I'm just making the lines finer by using tiny brush strokes of that gouache on the tip ends of those little seeds. Adding some more dark color in there just to give it a little bit of contrast and shadow. And I will return shortly and let you watch this for a second, and I'll be right back. Once I get all of those little seeds as fuzzy as I want them with my white gouache, and just get that dandelion as fluffy as I want it, then I'm just going to go ahead and add some really dark, like very dark, that purpley brown in some of the shadow areas, and that gives it more definition. And once I get all that in there, then I'm going to put a shadow behind her because she is standing sort of against the flag. So I'm just putting a little bit of that bluish gray as a shadow down the back. And that makes it look like she is casting a shadow onto the flag. And I'm also adding a little bit of shadow to some of those white stars to the top of her head. And there you go, a beautiful celebration of freedom, the seeds of hope. And I hope you enjoyed this holiday. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not, and share it with a friend that you think might like it as well. Thanks for watching. I will see you soon.